So the purpose of this talk here is to actually give you something actionable. A lot of TED Talks are about how incredibly amazing the person giving the presentation is, the neat experiences they've had, and the really incredible things that they are going to do in this world. And you're left a little awed, but a little wondering, well, crap, I guess I'm a loser, and I can go and I think it's neat that such people exist in the world, but I'm not as neat as that. Well, this is a little bit differently of a flavored talk, because the intent of this talk is to give you something that you can do tonight, to make your world a little bit different tonight. I want you to write some science fiction. And let me explain why I think that's really important and why I think it's a really good idea. Swipe. Pretty cool. So we all start really creative, right? There's a number of studies that show that you take kindergartners and you ask them, what are all the possible uses for a paperclip? They've got hundreds that they can go and come up with, right? Because like, well, if the paperclip was 10 miles long and floating, you could go and tour the world, and just like things that adults would never say because it's crazy, right? Because you learn what the world it really is, right? You're given multiple choice tests, and we learn what's real, right? And this means that there's one right answer, right? And this means that we need to constrain our thinking to what is known, and we start just thinking about the present, and we stop imagining the fanciful, the amazing, and the impossible. So how do we get back to that dreaming of the impossible? Because that really is the root of innovation, is thinking up the impossible and making it actually happen, right? And that would be really exciting. So I think the standardized testing is the wrong way to ensure that we have the right mentality for being innovative. There is more than one way to do it. Let's unleash the impossible. So who dreams up the impossible? Hollywood, right? These guys, it's their job to go and make impossible things. Beautiful, impossible things. So these guys do a lot of imagining of what might be, of what the future could hold, right? The interfaces look really freaking cool, like Minority Report, right? Like Tom Cruise, he's in the future, he's navigating an interface by flailing his arms, right? The only problem is, could you imagine doing this for 8 hours? Look at this pose. I mean, hey, my arms started burning after like 3 minutes, right? So these interfaces look really awesome, but they're kind of useless. Like pretty much any television show or movie that includes email has an email interface that looks something like this, right? You send an email, it goes whoosh, and it whirls around and slides exeunt stage left, right? And that's really exciting for like one email, but if you had to actually process every email every day with a big whoosh, you'd kind of like want to kill yourself, right? So these interfaces are not actually usable because they're just designed to look really cool on the screen for that brief cameo that they make in the TV show or the movie. But it's interesting that these interfaces look different than the day-to-day, right? There's some innovation that's going on here. It's in the wrong direction, but it is innovative, right? Likewise, we saw voice was consistently a theme, particularly like through the 80s, that the way that we were going to interact with computers was going to be to speak to them. You know, here we have the famous eye from the HAL 9000 in 2001, right? And the main way that you interacted with this crazy, powerful supercomputer was to speak to it, and it would speak back to you. And sort of displays and typing and stuff were kind of relegated to really second-class interactions, right? And even Apple thought that this was going to be the way that we interacted with computers. How many of you have actually seen this video that this is a clip of down here? So this is remarkable. It's about a 5-minute video. You can find it on YouTube. And this was Apple in the mid-80s making a short sci-fi movie about what interacting with Apple products could look like in the 21st century. So really, really fascinating. They put actors in it. They mocked up the interfaces. And there's some things that really turned out not to be true. So one of the big themes back then of how you're going to interact with your computer was going to be to interact with an avatar, because humans wanted an emotional relationship with their computer, right? So the computer should have a face on it, was the thinking, right? So here we see actually the butler right here is a computer-generated figure who is the computer, who the protagonist of this short movie is speaking with, and the butler speaks back, right? And they have this kind of respectful, interesting dialogue back and forth. That was thought that was going to be the main way that we interact with the computer. But what's interesting is that while that turned out to be an anachronism, and speech technologies are not how we interact with computers these days, even as voice recognition has gotten better and better and better, some of the other aspects of this video have held up incredibly true. This is actually a tablet device that the user makes multi-touch gestures on, pinch and zoom, swipe, like these sort of things. This was a vision for what computers might be like, here in the 80s. So this kind of dreaming, this kind of fantastic short-range sci-fi can really help inspire the actual technologies that we end up using. So Hollywood actually ended up inspiring a whole bunch of nerds. So these interfaces here were actually some of the early MP3 players on Windows, and they were actually some of the first Windows applications to not be square. And it took a whole lot of real technical cleverness in those days to figure out how to display an application that didn't have a square window. And the stated motivation behind the developers of these programs, the two on the left are screenshots of Kajoful, and the one on the right is Sonic, was that we wanted to make an interface that was as cool as what you would see in a movie, right? So they were really thinking kind of outside of the box, like how can we push computer technology. Now unfortunately, this is the same reason here why you've never actually used these to play your MP3s, was that they were focusing on the cool visual appearance, oh my god, what is that, over, hey, would you actually want to use this to listen to your music day in, day out, right? So, okay, so how do we design a future that's actually usable and that doesn't just look really cool but annoy the heck out of you after 10 minutes of using it, right? And the answer for that is to have empathy for the people who are actually going to be using it. Because if you think about any of these other interfaces that we showed, about a minute or two of introspection and empathetic thinking would quickly lead you to the conclusion that, no, I don't want to spend my whole day in front of a computer doing this. Well, maybe I'd get really beefy triceps or something, but I wouldn't want to be using a computer that way, right? So how do we give people empathy for thinking about how these interfaces could actually be used? Interfaces that don't exist, right? And I think this is where we have to note that the medium that you're using to express this vision in is part of the message, right? So we have been talking about a lot of visual media, right? And in that case, the focus inevitably is going to be on what looks really cool, because you're looking at something. That's why movies have these unrealistic but gorgeous interfaces, right? If it's audio, well then you could sort of imagine an NPR-style interface, and that would certainly devolve to speech interfaces and so forth. But how do you give people empathy for what it would be like really on a day-to-day basis to use these technologies? Well, I think text actually has an unusual advantage here. Because one of the things that books do, one of the things that short stories do, is they put you as the protagonist. So that you can really imagine that you really are flying on that broomstick and conquering sorcerers or whatever else it is that you're reading about. You imagine yourself there. And that's kind of important that it's not auditory because I don't sound like that. It's not visual because I don't look like that protagonist. It's first person. So you can really imagine that you are living that future. That is you engaging those devices that don't exist yet. And that's going to make it so that you want to design something that you actually would have a good experience using, right? So text is really important here. So what if we were to start writing about what we want the world to be? Now, not in the 500 years, millennium out kind of a thing, because that starts getting into fantasy, right? Because the world is changing so fast, you really can't begin to think about like what might life be like in 500 years, right? So if you write something that's on the order of 2 to 5 years out, it's far enough out that you sort of have to divorce yourself from thinking about the specific technologies that exist today and exactly how would you implement that and what would I have to write this weekend to make it happen like that, right? So it's like, no, let's step aside from the way that things work now. But let's think about something that in my lifetime could become real, right? So that's sort of like an interesting time horizon to be writing about, right? The sort of near future. And there's also interesting studies that show that people have a hard time really planning for more than 5 years out, right? So 2 to 5 years feels like about the right sort of time period to be writing for. So something plausible, but you're not exactly sure how you would go ahead and make it. So this enables you to think about what might an awesome experience of this technology that doesn't exist be, right? And that vision that you have, once you've made that concrete in your head, by writing out a short story of somebody actually using that technology that doesn't exist, is an awesome vision. And that awesome vision can guide the creation of the thing that you're building, can inspire you to go and build it, and it will be the thing that drives the development of that idea. Now, one of the things that I learned in starting a company was that I spent the first about a year and a half of my starting the company working on some tremendously clever technology, and I was shocked and appalled to find out that nobody cared how clever this technology was or how hard I had worked on it. What people cared about was, does this solve my problem? Is this useful to me, right? And so I wasn't starting with that vision of what would the end user's experience be of my product. I was starting from the technology is awesome, therefore fame and wealth should follow, right? And it was quite a life lesson to learn that that's the wrong approach, right? So if you start with a vision of what it's going to be like for a user to use your technology, that can drive the development. And there might be some parts in there that involve having to invent some very difficult technology, and there might be some bits in there that are actually shockingly easy. But it turns out that nobody cares about that either. They care about this awesome experience, right? So this actually brings me to an interesting anecdote about the iPad, that Steve Jobs had thought it up more than a decade ago, but when he tried to go ahead and build it, the technology just wasn't there. The device was too heavy, it was going to run out of batteries too fast, the multi-touch interfaces didn't work quite right, and so it sort of set an inspiration point inside the company to, let's be advancing these technologies, let's be seeing what we can do so that someday we can have this device that will be an incredible experience. And that centricity around what will the end user experience be like served them incredibly well, versus just looking at the present state of the laptop and thinking about, okay, make the screen twist around and then it would be kind of like a tablet, right? And that's basically what the iPad is, right? And all of those tablet computer manufacturers, pretty much all of them, did very, very poorly because they were thinking incrementally from how do I make a laptop into a tablet device, instead of thinking about the end user experience and then working on the technologies required to make that sci-fi real. So what would it be like to be living in a world that's very much like the world you're living in now, but a little bit more awesome, right? And those things that are a little annoying to you right now, that are not difficult, but like you sort of need to think about them. What if you didn't need to think about them? What would need to change for you not to need to think about them? And those things that are impossible for you right now, what would it take to make those things merely difficult, right? And those things that are difficult, what would it look like to make those so that they required a little bit of effort, but it wasn't a big deal, right? How would you feel to live in that world? What would be different, right? And it's in answering these questions that we'll end up inventing and then getting to live in the future. So I think you should go out and write some sci-fi. You should go write a short story that describes what you think the future is. Now, a lot of studies have also shown the importance of actually writing this stuff down. So my homework assignment for you guys is to go and write 3 paragraphs about how the world can and should be different with your really cool invention, because I think you all have it in you. And this is where all my best ideas have come from, and where the patents that I have pending have also come from, is from this vision of what the world should be like. Thank you.